Welcome to the Plain Faith Podcast, Episode 5.
We deal with all the classic mountain flying things. Mountain wave turbulence, weather in the valleys, rain in the valleys, wind just whipping through some of these valleys that you have to learn to deal with. And so it can be pretty intimidating sometimes to go out and go flying.
The Plain Faith Podcast is a podcast about missionary aviation and the stories of missionary aviators who have taken seriously Jesus' command to go and make disciples of all nations and are using airplanes to be His witnesses at the ends of the earth. Thank you for joining us for this episode. Your host for today's show will be Jimmy Tidmore, who, in addition to hosting this podcast, is a pastor and a pilot residing with his family in what is known as the Rocket City, Huntsville, Alabama. He is very interested in promoting missionary aviation and helping prospective missionary pilots reach the mission field. And now, with these introductions out of the way, let's get started on another great episode of the Plain Faith Podcast.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Plain Faith Podcast. Our flight plan for today's show will take us back to a familiar destination, the town of Wamena in Papua, Indonesia. You may remember that the very first guest on the Plain Faith Podcast, Daniel Giesland, also served in Wamena. Well, today we are going to be speaking with one of Daniel's teammates, Pete Greenwald, about his experiences not only in Wamena, but also about his experiences in preparing to serve as a missionary pilot for Mission Aviation Fellowship in that part of the world. I really enjoyed my conversation with Pete, and I am happy to share his story with you on this episode. Well, Pete, I'm very excited for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. I'm really looking forward to hearing about the work you were doing in Indonesia, along with the story of how God prepared you for that work and led you there in the first place. So welcome to the Plain Faith Podcast, and thank you for joining us for this episode.
Well, hey, thanks for inviting me to be part of this. I'm really excited to spend some time talking to you about a job that I absolutely love.
Oh, that is great. We look so forward to hearing from you. So why don't we kick things off by just learning a little bit more about you? For example, where are you from? Where did you grow up? And tell us about your family and so forth.
Yeah, sure. That's great. So I'm actually from your neck of the woods. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and my wife is as well. I grew up actually in Western New York and then moved down to Georgia when I was almost a teenager and really consider that to be my home. Both of my parents have been in full-time ministry for their entire careers, and really enjoyed growing up on a Christian camp. My dad was a camp director, and so I had a huge backyard with lots of fun stuff to do and people kind of always around and lots of great people who influenced my life. I have a big brother and a big sister, and so I'm the youngest of the family, and I'm the only one that's in a technical field. Parents in ministry, big brother in ministry, and my mom or my sister is raising her family. So, really, really blessed by such a great family. The other thing I have is kind of a family who has a background in missions. I'm the first guy in my family to be a pilot and to be a missionary, but extended family, I have had people all over the world from Africa to the Middle East, and then people who have been in full-time missions, just in America. So it's really cool to have a great wealth of knowledge that I've been able to pull from, and a great support base of family who are completely encouraging and supportive of what we do here.
Very cool. So tell me about your wife and your two boys.
Yeah. So my wife and I met actually in North Georgia at the camp where my dad was the director. We met when we were 14, and we were just kind of friends throughout all of our teenage years, and got married when we were 23 back in 2007. And now we have two awesome little boys. Our first is Cade, and he's 6 years old. He was born in Texas. And then Weston is our youngest son. He's 2.5 now, and he was born in Jakarta, Indonesia. after an emergency C-section in a third world country. So that was a pretty exciting story that we had there. And, props to my wife. She is awesome. And for her to be able to do that without, she didn't complain. She just did it with so much joy, and really blessed to have her. She's so supportive, and she is completely bought into what we're doing here. And really could not do this without her. She's just fantastic.
So what age would you say that you became a follower of Jesus for yourself?
Yeah, it wasn't until I was 19, actually. I spent most of my teenage years thinking that I was following Jesus, right? And did all the right things, went to church, was involved in youth group. I was involved in a band that was leading worship in North Georgia, and all these different things. After high school, I moved out and was living with some friends, and really became pretty unsatisfied with some things that I was allowing into my life. And very literally, one morning I woke up and just kind of felt the Lord say to me, Pete, I created you for so much more than this. I did not create you for these toxic things that you're allowing into your life. And so I literally rolled out of bed and packed up my clothes and put them in my car and called my mom and dad and said, hey, I'm coming home and I need your help. And they said, great. What can we do? And so that began about a year-long process of me asking hard questions and finding answers. And it was through that process of me reading and studying and my parents really investing in the questions that I was having that I really began a relationship with Jesus during that point. So for me, it wasn't an overnight thing. It was a process of what am I looking for in life? What is it that I actually believe? And then really finding the answers to those questions.
All right. Very good. I appreciate you sharing that. So then tell us about your two things. One, your call to missions, also your passion for aviation. Which one of those came first, and then how did they kind of come together?
Yeah. So I had a grandfather on my mom's side, and he was a staff sergeant for the Army Air Corps, served under General Patton in World War II. And he had a scrapbook at his house. And as a kid, 5, 6, 7 years old, I'd go over to his house, and the first thing I would do is I would pull out this scrapbook. And it was full of pictures of airplanes and reconnaissance photos because he worked for a recon unit flying P-38 Lightnings. So, he wasn't a pilot himself, but he loved airplanes because of that time that he spent in France. And he would just spend hours with me talking about each picture. And then the next time I would go a few months later, we'd do the same thing. I'd ask the same questions, and he would very patiently answer the same things. And that was really what began my love for aviation. So I kind of grew up, building model airplanes and thinking, man, wouldn't it be so cool to be a pilot? But I don't know if that'll ever happen, right? So fast forward to me finally deciding to follow Jesus, right? I moved back in with my parents, like I shared a minute ago. And during that time, I discovered that my dad's best friend was a flight instructor. He's a man of God, and he called me up one day and he said, hey, I need you to come down to the airport. I want to take you flying. I'm like, what is going on? Where's the airport? And he goes, oh, it's just a mile from your house. So I show up, and there's this little Cessna 172 sitting there, and I'm thinking, what are we going to do in this little, bucket of rust? And he puts me in the left seat, and the next thing I know, we're taking off, and I'm flying. And that began, the next couple of years of flight lessons where this guy just really invested in me. And that was the door that opened up to my call to missions, because I knew, okay, Lord, I'm following you now. I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, but here are the things that I like to do, and what do you want me to do? I don't know. So I'm flying airplanes, I'm studying, I'm learning about the Lord, and it came across Genesis chapter 12, where God says to Abraham, leave your country, leave your family, leave behind all these things that are important to you, and go to the land that I'm gonna make clear to you. Or what does he say? Go to the land that I will show you. And I thought, oh man, okay, Lord, I think this is it. And suddenly I'm brought back to these memories of reading books as a kid, right? I read Jungle Pilot. I read Through Gates of Splendor about, the martyrs in Ecuador. And the Lord is just using all of these things to bring back what I think was a call at a very young age to me being a 19-year-old kid saying, here, Pete, this is what your life has been leading up to. I've been building this story, this narrative for you, and now I'm putting all the pieces together. And so that's kind of how all that began.
That's really neat, and I like the way you said it, just sort of the pieces came together, and it was really sort of simultaneously with the aviation and the call to missions. They kind of worked hand in hand. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It was really at the same time, yeah.
So would you have any advice for someone who is maybe listening to this episode and wrestling themselves with a call to missions? Any help that you could give them as they're working through that? Or if you could go back and tell your 19-year-old self something, what would you say?
Yeah. The Lord speaks to all of us in really different ways. So I would say pay attention to the circumstances that are around you and to the people that are around you, because the Lord is not just placing people in your lives randomly. He's placing them there very specifically. And so when he places somebody there who is leading you towards missions and encouraging you towards missions, follow that open door. Go through it and keep going. Don't stop until the Lord closes a door in your face and says, nope, that's not the one I want you to go through. Oftentimes, our call to missions can be very unclear. We can say, okay, I think I want to go overseas, and I don't know what that means, and how do I do that, right? Well, the Lord's going to take care of all of that. We don't have to worry about the details. We just need to follow his leading and stick with it. Sometimes it's the persevering part that's the most difficult, especially when you're in a technical field like flight training. You know, Jimmy, that flight training can be really difficult sometimes and frustrating. And so, sticking with it, persevering through the tough things is really what the Lord is going to use to sharpen your character, to build your experience, and then eventually to put you exactly where he wants you, wherever that be in world missions.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure that will be helpful advice to someone who is listening. So we've talked about the way that you developed a passion for aviation. You've begun to talk about your flight training with this individual who was a friend of your father's. So tell us the bigger picture about your flight training. Where did it go from you working with this guy to getting to where you were through your ratings and so forth?
Yeah, sure. So I started at Lumpkin County Airport in North Georgia, up in Dahlonega, Georgia, and my flight instructor, Gene, was just an amazing man, a man of God, and he had a military background. And he really got me off on the right foot. In fact, I would say the Lord used him very specifically to give me a very solid initial education. So I did my entire private pilot license training with him. And he gave me such a great foundation for stick and rudder skills and basic navigation and those things that we really depend on every day. From there, I went to LeTourneau University, and they have a program there that allows you to do your all your flight ratings as well as your A&P certificate. So I started on that, and that was a pretty long journey. I spent 5 years out there, struggling through flight training, struggling through getting my A&P. I was not a natural mechanic, and I'm not naturally a technical guy, but the Lord helped me get through that. So at LeTourneau, I did my instrument, I did my tail wheel ratings, I did my high performance, I did my multi-engine and single commercial, and then I moved on to become a flight instructor and actually taught there at LeTourneau for 3 years. And if you've ever talked to a flight instructor, you know that it's when you begin teaching something that you really begin learning it. And you know this from your flight training experience and from your time working towards your CFI certificate. That's when you really get into the depths of aviation knowledge. So for 3 years, I taught there at LeTourneau, and that was really what solidified in me my calling towards aviation, because I thought, the Lord is really helping me do this, and he's placing people in my life that are mentoring me and urging me towards the mission field. And so there was one guy out there named Daryl, and he had just come back from Indonesia, actually, where he was serving with MAF. And he and I started instructing at LeTourneau the same year. And we became fast friends, and he quickly became one of my mentors. And so he spent a lot of time in my office giving me advice, correcting me on things that I was doing wrong with my students, correcting me on things that I was doing wrong in my own flight training and even in my own life. You know, he was discipling me not just as a pilot, but as a man. And what a great influence he was. And so finished out my degree, my A&P license, my commercial, my CFI stuff there, and then continued on full-time teaching for a year at LeTourneau University.
All right. So what was the program like there? I'm assuming it's a Part 141.
Yeah, that's right. It's a 141 program, and they're flying Cetabrias, tailwheel Cetabrias, Cessna 172s with a G1000, and they're flying Diamond Twin Stars with a G1000. They also have a 206, I believe, that they're using for high-performance training. So when I was there, they were not doing as much tailwheel training as they are now. And actually now they're teaching you to get your private license in the Cetabria. So you start out with really having to master good stick and rudder skills. And I think that's a great way to start. It's really setting people up for success in the long term, no matter what kind of airplane you're flying, whether you're flying a 777 or a 206 or a Cessna Caravan, having good stick and rudder skills is imperative to being a good pilot. So it's really cool to hear how that's going there. 141 school, is very structured. And I bounced around with a variety of instructors and was able to gain experience and little lessons from each one of them. And so that built a mosaic of my flight training. All these people speaking in little bits at a time that builds my perspective and builds my training and builds decision-making, all those things that we consider to be so important. Doing multi-engine was, that was challenging. The Diamond Twin Star, I don't know if you've ever flown that, but the Lycoming powered Diamond Twin Stars require a ton of rudder pressure when you've got a engine failure. And so it just really teaches you to handle the airplane. You just do what you got to do. So that was really good as well. But being in the 141 environment, the structure is fantastic. You've got people above you, your chief pilot, and all the other assistant chief pilots that are doing check rides and teaching classes. What a wealth of information for me to go to, walk into their office and say, I'm struggling with this. I don't understand this concept and I don't know how to teach it. And they can just pour into you and help you understand stuff. And that was just priceless to me to have those guys around.
Well, great. I appreciate you sharing about your time at LeTourneau. I know it is an outstanding place to do your training, and I'm glad to hear you tell that process to others. What about someone who might be listening who is heading into flight training to become a missionary pilot or is maybe in the middle of it? Would you have some advice for them as they are working through those things?
Yeah. I personally really struggled through some flight training times, feeling like I wasn't a good student, questioning my calling to the mission field. Lord, I'm not doing a good job. I can't seem to learn the things that I need to learn. Are you not calling me to this? What's going on? Like I said earlier, you kind of have to push through those hard times. As a flight instructor, I know that students reach plateaus, and they're going to have to struggle through those plateaus before they can begin to learn again. And, I don't really know how to help people through that, but it's a difficult process, and it's a sharpening process that the Lord used for us. The other thing I would say is that during flight training is a great time to focus. Really focus in on two things. One, mastering your craft as a pilot. That is your time. You're focused in school, and you may never have another time in your life to really focus in on it. That's the time, because you've got people around you that can support you and answer your questions. The other thing you can do is you can spend time with the Lord. What a great way to combine your two passions for Jesus and for airplanes, and to solidify where is it that the Lord is leading me with this? Is he leading me to the airlines? Is he leading me to be a cargo operator somewhere? Am I going to go fly caravan on floats in the Bahamas? Am I going to go fly King Airs overseas? Am I going into mission aviation? Using that time wisely, I think, is such an important thing.
Okay, very good. And one thing you came to mind as you said that is, just because it's hard doesn't mean God's not calling me to do it, right? And we so often think that, oh, this is hard, so God must not be wanting me to do this. Well, no, I mean, look at the individuals in the Bible. It was often hard, not always easy. And so, yeah, when we hit those hard times, it doesn't mean that it's not something God wants us to do. It just means that He's using that difficulty to prepare us for something down the road.
Yep, that's right.
So, Pete, tell us more about the place that you're serving in now. What is it like, and how is it different from your home, and what you have been used to, and what are some of the things that have been most difficult for you and your wife to adjust to there?
Yeah. So we live in Wamena, Papua, Indonesia. So we're on the island of New Guinea, and this half of the island happens to be part of Indonesia. Mission Aviation Fellowship has been here for about 63 years now on the island, I think. And it is amazing to serve here, and the people here are fantastic. To answer your question about how is it different, it'd be easier to compare the things that are not different than the differences, because everything, if you can imagine living in a foreign country where everything is different. Going to the grocery store is different, driving is different, the language you use is different, your thought processes are different. It's all different, right? And so it takes time to adjust to that. It's not easy. Learning a language is hard. Learning to go grocery shopping at an open air market where the fish smells awful, that's not an easy thing to do. But with time, it normalizes, and you begin to find your own routine and your own ways of doing things. And, eventually you don't even notice it anymore. But it's not to say that it's easy. It's not like I have a Target down the street where I can just go, buy my favorite barbecue sauce, because I don't. We have to have that sent in packages that my parents send. But, we just love being here in Indonesia, and it's a great place with great people. And I can't think of a more exciting place to serve.
So how did you end up there, and what was the process that led to you narrowing in on Indonesia as the place that you would serve as a missionary aviator?
Yeah. So the first step in that is really deciding, what organization do I go with? Do I go with Mission Aviation Fellowship? Do I go with JARS? Do I go with New Tribes? There's all these organizations that I could choose from. And that seemed like a really daunting task for us. What if I choose wrong? Or what if they don't like me? Or what if they don't accept me? That's a pretty difficult decision to make. So my wife and I were very blessed. When I was working at LeTourneau as a flight instructor, she was working as an admissions counselor. And LeTourneau decided, you know what? You two are the perfect couple to represent us at the Oshkosh Air Show. And so they sent us up there, and we had a booth set up in the missions tent representing LeTourneau University, and got to rub shoulders with everybody up there. And what we discovered is that we wanted to find an organization that matched our personality. Each organization has its own personality. They have certain types of people. They have certain ways of thinking. They have certain types of ministry that they're focused on. And so for us to be able to sit down and eat lunch and dinner with missionaries from all these different organizations was a huge blessing. And for us, that helped solidify that we felt that MAF and Pete and Ashley Greenwald were really a good fit. And so we decided to pursue MAF quite seriously. So after college, I graduated, and we went straight to Nampa, Idaho, and did our technical evaluations with MAF. And if you don't know what that is, it's a 2-week-long interview where all of your flight training and all of your mechanicking and your life story is really looked at in depth. And MAF then decides whether or not you're a good fit for the organization, and it's us deciding whether or not we're a good fit for the organization as well. And so MAF chose to accept us after that, and We had some school debt to pay off, and we were pregnant with our first child, and so we decided to take a year. I continued teaching there at Laterno, and then we joined MAF. So that was July of 2011 when we joined MAF. The way MAF works is, because it's a big organization, they serve in so many countries around the world, they look at the personality of the people that are joining, and they actually assign you to your field. Now you get a little bit of say, and if you really don't feel good about it, then you get to say so. But MAF assigned us to Indonesia, and we were so excited because that's where we really felt the Lord was leading our hearts. We were excited about the type of ministry that's going on here, excited about just being in this part of the world was pretty fun. And we knew a lot of people that had been in Indonesia or currently were in Indonesia, and listening to their stories about the work that they're doing, the ministry that they're helping with, and that the lives that their kids are leading, that was really exciting to us. So Indonesia was we thought it was a great fit.
Cool. So one thing, maybe take a few steps back. You talked about your call to the missions and how that played out in conjunction with your passion for aviation. Tell me about how your wife, Ashley, felt. When did she start feeling led in a similar direction, and how did those two desires come together?
Yeah, this is probably one of the most important pieces of the puzzle, because as a married couple, if both of us are not completely on board with what we're doing, there's no way that we could live here. But my wife had a mission trip in college that she went on, and she just really began to feel the Lord leading her towards overseas missions. She had no idea what that looked like, right? She and I were not dating at the time. We were just friends, and we talked occasionally. And when we finally started talking a little bit more seriously to each other, I said to her, look, here's Mission Aviation Fellowship. Here's what they do. This is where I feel the Lord is leading me. And she said, Pete, this is the Lord's answer to Him leading me. Because I was wondering how I'm going to get overseas, feeling a call to missions, but saying, I don't know how it's going to work out. And here the Lord's bringing me a man who wants to do the same thing. And so her having an individual call to missions and me having an individual call to missions, which then came together, we think that's such an important thing, because it's not just one of you tagging along with the other, but you're both completely sold on what the Lord is doing in your life. And it requires both of us to be on board to make this whole thing work.
Okay, so I understand you do your technical evaluation with MAF, and then after that, I'm sure there is some flight training that takes place with them to get you prepared for some pretty crazy flying, right?
That's right.
But that's just a piece of it. What about the practical side and preparing you and your wife for the big changes that you're going to face when you land in this country on the other side of the world? How do they prepare you for that?
Yeah, they did a great job preparing us for that. The initial classes that we take at MAF are all about MAF's global vision, what they feel the Lord is leading them to, their focus on ministry. And then you leave that and you go and you do support raising. And that's a pretty trying process. If you've never had to ask people for money, it's not easy. To be able to convey your vision to somebody else about what you want to do with your life and then say, I need your help to do it. Wow, that's challenging. But MAF prepared us really well for that. After support raising, they had us back in Idaho for about 3 months. And we did not only flight training and maintenance training, but a lot of cultural classes that were preparing us for things like communication issues and just a lot of the cross-cultural things that you would never think of because you've never been overseas, right? Or you've never lived overseas. And so how do you know about the little ins and outs of living within a certain culture? And so they were preparing us for the stress that can be involved, the issues that your kids can face as they're overseas, the issues that your marriage can face as you're overseas. And they really helped us to stay focused on the Lord during that time, to make sure that our trust was in Him, and to trust Him to help us learn this new culture and this new place that we live. And I'll tell you what, to this day, there's stuff that we have not mastered. In fact, we've probably mastered absolutely nothing. But little by little, we're learning lessons about how to live. It's like becoming a child again. I go back to knowing no language and not knowing how to do anything, and you feel like a 2-year-old. But then with a little bit of time, you learn the language, your vocabulary gets better, you learn how people think, you learn how the town works and how to buy groceries and how to get your internet set up, and all those little tiny things add up, and they help you learn to be basically an adult in this new place. So, I'm so thankful for the work that MAF did to prepare us for these hard things, also for a lot of the fun things. And those classes were really, really influential for us.
Okay, and so when you arrive in Indonesia, there's other MAF personnel there. How did they help you with the transition, and how have those people become your close friends, I would imagine?
Yeah, sure. So our first year in Indonesia was language school, and probably the hardest and most fun year of my life was spent in language school. We were met by our regional director, who took us to our home a couple hours away, kind of in the jungle of Indonesia and central Java. And he introduced us to the ladies that would be working in our house and cooking for us and taking care of our kids while we were learning language. And then they said, if you need anything, call us. And there were a couple other MAF families that were there doing language school as well. So they had a little bit of experience that we were able to ask them to help us with things. And the rest of it, you just kind of have to learn on your own. We went to language school about 2 to 4 hours a day. And every day you get a little bit more fluent with the language and a little bit more comfortable with what you're saying and how you're saying it. So that first year was really important to us. It also gave us time, without having to worry about flying in the mountains and bad weather and all these different things, it gave us time to adapt to the culture and learn how to communicate properly with people and learn how not to communicate with people. We had a lot of those scenarios. So MAF did a great job of supporting us through language school. And then it was after that that we received our assignment and began serving in the field.
So, Pete, what was something about being on the mission field that you simply did not expect and took you completely by surprise?
Yeah, I talked a minute ago about feeling like a child. And I'll tell you what, there's nothing that can hurt your pride more than not understanding something. And the process of learning a culture and learning a language was really difficult for my pride, because I wanted desperately to communicate with people. I had this felt need to be good at language and be a good missionary and be excellent for the Lord. And I'll tell you what, he just tore me down to where I just felt like, Lord, I don't know what I have left to offer, because I am so bad at language and I am so bad at learning culture. And I just feel like I'm constantly behind by 10 steps. I just don't understand anything that's going on around me. And I had no way to know that was coming. I'd never done it before. There was no practice sessions for learning how to learn a new language and culture. And so that was a pretty tough thing for me. Like I said earlier, with time, it gets better. But I think everybody I know has experienced stuff like that you just didn't see coming. And it really can knock you off balance. But thankfully, the Lord was there to help us out as we transitioned through language learning into relationships with local people to eventually being able to, have real communication with people. So I'll tell you what, though, still to this day, walking around here in my town, we've been in Indonesia coming up on 5 years now, and I still feel like a kid. I still don't know what's going on most of the time. I still go, why do we do things this way? Why is the driving so crazy? Why is it so hard for me to go to the market and buy bananas? But it's all part of the sharpening process. And I had a pastor one time say to me, you know what, Pete, I think for a lot of missionaries, going to the mission field is less about what you do for the people, and it's more about what God is doing in your life. And I think on it now and go, yeah, I am probably so messed up that God had to remove me from my culture and from things that I was comfortable with and put me in a place where I was literally a little kid again, so that he could get a hold of me and speak to me and speak into my life the way that he wanted to. And so it's all just part of the process.
So that was a pretty serious conversation. Maybe you have a funny story to share about your transition, something having to do with cultural differences or language differences that caused some sort of confusion, and now you can look back on it and laugh. Do you have anything like that to share?
I do, actually. So in language school, our neighbor was also our landlord. And he'd had a bunch of MAF families come through in the past, and he knew that we were there to learn language. And so he would knock on my door if I wasn't over there in the evenings. He'd, come on, you got to come over to my house, and we're going to eat some weird Indonesian food, and we're just going to practice language, right? So he had a bunch of people over one night, and they were asking me all these questions. And the word for foreigner and the word for goose, like a goose, geese, are not, well, they're very similar. Let's put it that way, right? So they were trying to ask me one night if we eat geese in America. And I responded very quickly by saying, yes, we eat foreigners in America. And it took me the next 5 or 6 minutes to figure out what I'd said wrong, because everybody was cackling so loud that I was like, well, maybe I'm just really funny. I don't know. But yeah, it took me a while to figure that one out. But stuff like that happens all the time. Probably most of them are not appropriate enough to share, because they often involve stuff that's just really funny and you typically not appropriate to share publicly. But man, right, stuff like that happens all the time.
Yeah, this is a family-friendly show, so let's keep it there. But you're correct. I know what you're getting at.
Yeah.
So let's transition to talking about the airplanes and the flying part of the work that you're doing there. Tell me about the planes that you fly and work with, and what type of flying and work that you normally do.
Yeah, sure. So I fly a Cessna Grand Caravan. It's a legacy model. They call it legacy because it's old, right? Because it doesn't have the G1000, the nice glass panels in it anymore. So fly an old steam gauge airplane with the Garmin 530, 430 GPSs. And, the Caravan is a big airplane. It's the biggest thing I've ever flown. I can carry 1,300 kilos of cargo. Do the math on that, about 2,700 pounds of cargo every day on my first flight. It is a big airplane. It's a lot to manage. The environment here in Wamena, we're up at around 100 feet elevation, and we've got mountains surrounding us on all four sides that go up as high as 14,000 feet. And so it is mountain flying all day long. You just can't get away from it. And so we deal with all the classic mountain flying things: mountain wave turbulence, weather in the valleys, rain in the valleys, wind just whipping through some of these valleys that you have to learn to deal with. And so, it can be pretty intimidating sometimes to go out and go flying. Thankfully, MAF has a great safety culture, and they say, you know what, if you don't feel comfortable going, don't go. It's not worth it. We can wait till the next day if we need to. And so having that freedom to make those safe decisions is really important to us. But have you ever flown a Cessna Caravan?
Biggest Cessna I've ever flown's a 182.
Okay, right. Well, it's a little bigger than a 182. What's 182? Right. Probably about 3,000 pounds gross weight, I would assume, out of a 182. So the Caravan, single engine, turboprop, wingspan is about 52 feet, and we have some pretty awesome modifications on this thing that allow us to carry extra weight. And so I'll take off in the mornings at around 9,000 pounds or so. Before those modifications are done, the airplane takes off at a much lighter weight, and it performs a lot better. Now, with all this extra weight in the airplane, well, it takes a little bit of extra work to get a gross weight Grand Caravan up to these high altitudes that we fly at. And so we do a lot of planning ahead. We have to plan our climbs. We can't just turn towards a mountain and assume that we'll climb over it. And we zigzag back and forth as we're trying to get up to these mountain passes, and we just barely cross them, and then we descend back down and we drop into our little valley that we're going to land in. So it's actually really, really fun, but it requires a lot of management of a heavy airplane and an engine that is quite a bit different than what's on a Cessna 172 or 182. And
so you also serve as the mechanic on the plane that you fly?
yeah, many of us serve as mechanics. I'm licensed here in Indonesia. Honestly, I don't really do a whole lot of maintenance. That most of our caravan maintenance happens at a different base down in Sentani. So I actually managed all of our electronic flight bags for our entire fleet. We've got 10 airplanes here in Papua, Kodiaks and caravans. And so when I arrived here, they said, you know what, we've heard you're good with electronic things, so would you put together some electronic flight bags for us? And so we have an iPad for each aircraft, and in it contains all of our airstrip directory information, a lot of our general route information, instrument approach procedures, our technical manuals that we follow, POH, and all those different things. And so I spend about a day or two a week managing all the data that is involved in that. So that keeps me pretty busy, that along with flying. Every now and then I do some maintenance stuff as well. But we also have maintenance specialists that are here that are not pilots. And they do a fantastic job of maintaining our airplanes. Those guys work really hard, and they do a great job. Okay,
so you've piqued my curiosity a little bit about the electronic flight bags, which really it just got me thinking, what is the, we have sectional charts and approach plates that are published by the government and Jeppesen and other folks like that here. What sort of thing are you working with there? And is there a specific software that you're using on the iPad? Just go into a little bit more detail there.
Yeah, this is a really good question. So in the States, we've got ForeFlight. Most everybody uses ForeFlight. And what a fantastic tool. Unfortunately, we don't have, it doesn't support our part of Indonesia. And so I had to kind of come up with a system on my own. So we use a software called GoodReader, and it is meant to be a PDF reader.
Right.
And it syncs to our servers. And so I put all of our data on the servers and arrange the file structure. And then each iPad, when you open up GoodReader, that's kind of where we live with our EFB. I also made a sectional, actually, kind of combined some sectionals that we had, and I was able to put those on the iPad. And we've got a couple other things that we use on there, like voice recorders, and the camera comes in handy every now and then. There's all kinds of stuff that iPad is useful for. So really, it's an important tool, and it eliminates a lot of paper, and it allows us to do electronic updates. We have 145 airstrips or so that we're serving, and to be able to update those one at a time whenever we need to is a really helpful thing. We also use Jeppesen. We have a Jeppesen subscription, and we just download the current approach plates and procedures and stuff to our computer, and then we upload those to the server. So it's a pretty easy way to do it. It's not the most user-friendly way to do it necessarily, but it works really well for our operations here.
So you're basically scanning sectional charts and approach plates and converting those to PDFs, and those are being synced to GoodReader on the iPads.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, and then within the file structure, we just we make it easy for pilots to figure out where they need to go to get certain information. So it works pretty well. It's just like navigating a PC.
ForeFlight better watch out, huh?
Yeah, right. If only.
Very cool. That was a little bit of a tangent, but I thought I was interested in that, and I think probably there's some folks listening that would be as well, because we just take it for granted back home, right? We don't think about that sort of thing. We know we can get what we want, whether it's in paper or electronically, and you've got a whole different set of challenges to deal with there. And hey, on that line of thinking, why don't you talk a little bit about how the flying that you're doing there differs from the flying that you were used to back home?
Yeah, wow. It's a whole different world, Here in Papua, I would say 95% of my airstrips are not flat. So I'm dealing typically with 4% or more slope. I have a couple where in the touchdown zone I've got 16% slope, and one that goes up to 24% slope just before the parking area. And so just that in itself is a whole new thing to master. A lot of these airstrips are tucked down in tiny little valleys where you pass a certain point and you can't go around anymore. And so you have to make sure that things are set up really well. And that brings up a good point about just a little flight discipline thing here, if I could talk about that for a second.
Sure.
One of the luxuries we have in America, you could say, not in all places, but in many places, is nice, long, paved runways with easy go-around procedures, right? And it's easy to get yourself into the mindset of, yeah, okay, I've got this nice long runway in front of me, and I can land wherever on it, and no big deal, right? But here you've got to keep yourself in this mindset of saying, I don't always have the option to go around. I have to be in what we call the abort mindset, right? So even though the weather looks great, coming up on what we call our key position or our abort point, I have to constantly be saying to myself, you know what? Should I go around? Do I need to go around right now? Is everything looking good? Or can I continue? Because once I continue past this point, there's no going around. I got to take my lumps however they fall. So that's a really good thing for future aviators to think about as they're putting themselves in the mindset of, what does it take to fly in these mountains sometimes? Now, MAF gives us fantastic training, and it has paid off for me big time a couple times, where you get up to an abort point and you're just feeling uncomfortable. Well, I could do it. The weather looks fine, but I feel uncomfortable for some reason. Okay, and you go around. 2 minutes later, you get a call from the guy in the airstrip that said, yeah, the wind just got really blustery down here, and it's really bad, and you should go home. Don't land. Well, thank you, MAF, for good training, because that really saved my bacon today. So those are just kind of some of the little details, the techniques that we deal with as we're flying these mountains. So the other thing that we deal with here was, like I said, there's no mountains in Texas. Here, I've got mountains, some places up to 16,000 feet, depending on where you are on the island. And I'm often down in narrow valleys in a heavy airplane, trying to navigate weather and wind and get into a little tiny airstrip that's really quite challenging to land at. So managing things like my turn radius or my energy, or making sure that I always have an out. Where am I going when something goes wrong? Those are things you just have to constantly keep in mind here. Whereas, not that you don't do that in America, it's just maybe not as important to you because there's no open fields for me to land in. If my engine quits, what have I got? I've got a rocky river down below me that's full of rapids, or I've got the side of a mountain. And so, I'm just so grateful for the training that we've gotten. But, it takes a really focused mindset to keep yourself in a place where you're constantly looking for outs and looking for the safe thing to do, and you're willing to turn around and go home when you need to, because sometimes the best thing you can do is just turn around and go home and not even trying to land.
Very good. And that's good advice no matter where you're flying. But,
absolutely.
But particularly where you're at, you're used to flying a lot in Texas, and I fly in Alabama, and there's lots of fields in those places, and lots of good places to land, and it's easy to play the where would I land now game.
That's right.
But I imagine in Indonesia, it's a little bit more challenging to play that game.
Yeah. One of the things we think about here quite often is what we call margin. And, margin, I would define it as the space between where I currently am and having a problem, right? Mm-hmm. And I want to have lots of space. I want to have lots of margin so that if something goes wrong, I still have extra space, right? Well, I think this applies to, for all of us pilots out there, this applies no matter where we're flying. It's easy to push weather. It's easy to say, well, I've done that before, I could do it again. But you know what? We always have to maintain margin. And if I'm pushing right up to the edge of what I can do, the limits of my skill, the limit of the airplane performance, I have no margin. I have no safety margin. And it's such an important thing for us aviators to think about no matter where we are in the world. It also translates over into life lessons, right? We think about managing stress. I've talked about stress a little bit and things that we face here in the field. And we have to make sure that in our life, we've got margin. If I fill my glass up too much, eventually the water's going to run out. And I hope that with, having kids and having a house or managing a car, whatever it is that we've got, all those things, they pour a little bit more water into our glass. And if we're not being careful and if we're not taking time to manage our levels, it's easy for us to overflow. And all of a sudden we have no margin. We can't deal with extra things that are coming at us in life, So that's one of the ways that I carry a flying lesson over into life, is to make sure that we've always have extra margin.
Good advice. Thank you. So what would you say is the most exciting part about being a missionary pilot?
Well, there's a lot of things to choose from, The flying is obviously fun. Living overseas in the tropics is obviously fun. My favorite part, though, is getting to know the people that we serve, because you get to hear the stories. When did you first learn about Jesus? What was life for you? What was life like before you heard the gospel, and what's life like now after that you've heard the gospel? Tell me how that is different for you. Those are the really exciting things for me. A lot of what we do here is supporting missionaries who live in the jungle, and hearing about their cultural faux pas that we were talking about earlier is always fun. But also hearing about how the Lord is changing hearts and people. Man, that is good stuff. That's why we're here.
Talk to me some more about how you are supporting missionaries that live out in the jungle, and how you make it possible for them to do the real frontline work that they're doing.
Yeah, sure. A lot of the people that we support live in villages where you either walk there or you fly there. There's no road. There's no other way to get there. And so we're kind of their lifeline to the modern world. If they have a medical emergency, we go get them. If they need food, we take it to them. If their kids need to go to school, we go get them and we take them to school. That's just kind of how we support these people. But more than that, just being able to transport them in and out as they're doing their work. They go in for a few weeks, they do some Bible translation work, they do some discipleship work, whatever it is that they're focusing on, then they come back out and they do all the other work that is involved in doing those things. So we just take them in and out. And to me, one of the funnest things is to go in and just be an encouragement to them. Because here they live in an isolated place, surrounded by people that don't speak their language, that don't know their culture, and they're there trying to learn their language and translate the Bible or do discipleship or start a church, whatever it is that they're doing there. To go in and see a face that speaks the same language and understands things similarly to you, oh, what a huge encouragement. And so to be able to go and just say hi, how are you doing, have coffee with them, hear what's going on with them, be able to pray for them before you leave, those are some of the most important things that I think we do as we're serving our missionaries interior.
Yeah, that's great. Very important, each of those things that you mentioned. So do you have a favorite memory or story, something that you'll think back on for years and be proud of, that you were a part of, or just thankful that you were able to witness it?
Yeah, I sure do. I have lots of those memories, so it's kind of hard to choose from. Let me start, though.
You can share more than one.
Yeah, okay. Let me start by saying that it's important to understand that not every flight we do has a profound impact. A lot of the flights we do, I'm just carrying rice or noodles or, building supplies. And I would say most of the flights that I'm doing, that's what I'm doing. These are important to the communities, but it's difficult sometimes when you think, well, is this having any eternal impact? I don't know what's going on, right? But there are the flights that we do where you look at them and you go, wow, this was one of those impactful flights. So we have a friend here that is really involved in education, and he wants education in Papua to really grow and to start teaching these kids to think critically and to become good, solid leaders in their community. And it was about 6 months ago that I got to take a group of his teachers into a village where they were going to start a school for the very first time, and they were doing student selection, and they were looking for buildings, and I thought, man, the impact of this flight is way more far-reaching than I can ever imagine, because the kids that they choose today or tomorrow after I fly them in, those kids will eventually graduate from this school, and some of them will go on to be leaders in their community. Some of them might go on to work in the government. Some of them might go on to become missionaries themselves. And wow, what a huge, huge blessing to play such a small role in being part of that, And we get to support a lot of different schools. Yeah. There's a bunch of different schools that we support. Every once in a while, they get to go be part of one of the classes and hear the kids count in English or sing a song about the Lord or, do something that's really fun. And it's just, oh man, it just brings so much joy to our hearts to see these young men and women who grew up here hopefully one day become leaders in their community. So that's really cool. I've done a bunch of others. One of the coolest ones that I did was I took a guy into a village, and for me it was just a normal day of flying. I landed at this airstrip that was, it's challenging, but it's one of our more beginner airstrips, and park at the top, and I'm greeted by this crowd of people. What's going on? There's people with bows and arrows running around. They're all dressed up in their traditional outfits, and I'm thinking, wow, this is a big deal. I wonder who it is that I brought in. And started asking around some of the guys that I know there, and they said, oh yeah, the guy that you brought in and his family have been away for 20 years, and for legal reasons they were not able to come back. But you just reunited a family, a son with his dad, for the first time in 20 years. And I thought, oh, thank you, Lord, that I get to be part of this, It's so important, these little tiny things that we do, the impact that we have, it's so far-reaching that we'll never know this side of heaven. But, I think about even airline pilots and cargo pilots. They don't know who's in the back. They don't know what their passengers are traveling for. But, they're part of the impact. Those people are traveling for funerals or weddings or all these different things that are important to them, Aviation is such an impactful thing all around the world. And whether you're in Indonesia flying a Cessna Caravan or a Quest Kodiak, or if you're, in Dubai flying an A380 for Emirates, you know what? You still get to be part of the story that the Lord is writing for people. It's really cool.
So you've been in Indonesia for 5 years now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you've talked to me briefly about some of the good things. I imagine, though, it's not always been easy, and there have been some struggles along the way. And I'm not just talking about maybe day-to-day difficulties, but extended struggles that have challenged you and your wife and your family. Would you be willing to share some of those with the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. We're far away from family. It's 30 hours and a few $1,000s for us to get back to family. And when we see friends having kids, they're 10,000 miles away. We grew up with them, but we're not there when they have their first kid. We're not there when their child gets diagnosed with a life-changing disease. When our parents call us with health news, we're not there. That is tough for us to deal with. Knowing that my kids will not know their grandparents the same way that I knew my grandparents, that's a pretty tough thing for me to deal with. And there's no answer to it. Thankfully now, we're not sending letters back and forth that take 3 months to get from here to America, right? We've got FaceTime and we've got Skype and all these different ways that we can communicate with each other. But there's no substitute for being present with a person. So it's those relational things that I think they take the biggest toll on us, to know that we are so far away, and in times of need, I can't even offer my best friends my presence. All I can do is send them a text that says, I'm praying for you. But that just seems so far disconnected from what I would like to do for them. So those are some of the, that's the tip of the iceberg, really, of some of the stuff that we deal with. For my wife, she often feels isolated. Here she is, living in a community that is not her own. Her husband is out doing his thing during the day, and she's here with the kids. She just finished homeschooling our first for kindergarten, and he starts at the international school next year. But to not have a large group of friends around you is a pretty difficult thing, too. We've got our teammates here, but, just to be completely honest with you, when you live on a base with all your teammates, sometimes you get sick of your teammates. You don't want to be around them anymore, right? You want to go be with your friends that you're used to back in the States and have conversations that are maybe a little bit easier. It's pretty difficult to deal with the distance from our family and friends. I would say that one weighs heavily on us quite frequently.
Okay, I appreciate you being open and honest about that. And the next question is about spiritual struggles. I imagine some of that spills over into your spiritual life as well. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just on another conference call with somebody this morning, and they were saying, "What can we do for you?" And I said, "We need Bible study materials because we don't have great internet. I can't really stream my home church or the pastors that I like to listen to. Can't do that all the time. And so being able to spend time in the Word is sometimes a difficult thing for us to do. I work 45 to 55 hours a week. I've got little kids. Going grocery shopping takes way longer than it should, but it does. And all of those things can eat into your time. And suddenly you go, oh man, it's been a month and I don't know the last time that I sat down and spent any time with the Lord. Because I'm so busy doing life that it just disappears. Where'd the time go? I don't know. And so, maintaining a vibrant spiritual life over here is very difficult. Honestly, it's not something that we've mastered. It's something that we struggle with every day. And we have to be really intentional about setting time aside to go spend time in the Word, go spend time watching a sermon. We have a church here that we go to on the weekends. It's a bunch of our missionary friends, and we spend time singing together and watching a sermon together and those kinds of things. But to be away from your home church, out of that body of believers, is a pretty tough thing. The other thing that can cause spiritual struggles is seeing some of the difficulties around you, seeing the extreme poverty that others live in, seeing occasional violence, seeing the way that other men treat their wives sometimes. I'm talking about local people here. That can raise some pretty tough questions for me sometimes. And I think, well, Lord, how do I reconcile these in my brain? Here I am. I've got so much. You've given me so much. And many of these people here just don't have that. And it's not easy to deal with the extreme poverty and the lack of knowledge and the lack of understanding that some people have. And I wonder, Lord, how are you gonna help these people? What about them? So those are tough questions to answer. And, I wonder if there is an answer sometimes, but yeah.
So when all of these sorts of struggles start piling up, whether it's just general life struggles, missing home, wanting to be with family and friends, or spiritual struggles that you've discussed, what keeps you pressing forward through those struggles till the time you get to the other side?
We had a good conversation with a friend recently as we were talking about struggling with our kids not knowing their grandparents very well. And our friend reminded us, the Lord will redeem all of this. One day, on the other side, when we're all sitting around in heaven together, all of this time, all of the cost will be redeemed. We'll have time with our grandparents. We'll have time with our friends. What we're living now is just such a short period of time. So maintaining that eternal perspective is really an important thing. Beyond that, though, I also find it's important to have somebody that I can talk to. So I have a friend in America who I can just text and be completely honest with, and he does not judge me in the slightest, but he just says, you know what, that's hard, and I'm sorry that you're dealing with that, and let's pray together. And having somebody like that who could just be your black hole that you can share with completely openly is really, I consider that a must-have in this life that we live. I would say that's true for anybody, no matter what kind of lifestyle you live, right? But for us over here, when friends are often far away and maybe you don't want to share certain stuff with your teammates because you work so closely with them, It's just so important to have somebody like that. So that friend really keeps me going. Carrying an eternal perspective keeps me going, and being able to focus on the work that we're doing here and remind myself that I've got to think long term. If I think day to day, sometimes it's hard to see the impact that you might be having, because the impact of the gospel is a life-changing thing. We know that lives don't change overnight normally. It's normally a process of growth and experience and all these different things. But here I'm a pilot. I'm a goal-oriented guy. I'm going to go from A to B and then get back home, and that's my job, right? So I want to see results. But when I don't see results in an immediate sense, that can become pretty frustrating. So to continue thinking long-term, to think 10 and 15 and 20 and 100 years down the road, that really helps put into perspective some of the difficulties that we face here.
Okay, well, thank you. That all of that was so good and encouraging to me, and I know others will feel the same way. So, kind of bringing things to a close, let me just ask you if you have any other final suggestions or advice or encouragement for prospective missionary pilots.
I would just say this. If you feel the Lord leading you into mission aviation or just missions in general, pursue it with all that you've got. Even when it's hard, when you feel like maybe this isn't what I'm supposed to do, keep going. Keep going until the Lord shuts the door in your face and turns you a different direction. But don't give up. Because if you give up, you might never know. You never know where the Lord's going to lead you. So we have to keep following His leading, pressing through the open doors. Maybe they're only cracked open, and we need to push them open a little bit. But if we give up, we're never going to know, right? Following the Lord is a huge adventure. We don't need to be relegated to lives of boredom, right? We follow the God of the universe. And so seek after that adventure. Seeking after the gospel, seeking after Jesus is an adventure. And we get to have fun and be part of the greatest story ever written. And so why would we back off? Why would we say, well, this is too hard? No, it's worth it. It is absolutely worth it. So I would say don't give up. Don't let yourself get discouraged. Don't let yourself get bought into having a cushy life and a nice house and all these different things, Sometimes you got to make tough decisions if you're seeking after Jesus. But man, it is always, always worth it. It's just not always easy.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if there is a book or two that helped you in your times where you were thinking about becoming a missionary, or just a book that maybe helped you in your own spiritual growth and in your walk with Jesus, something that you might want to share with the listeners.
Yeah, sure. One of the most important books that I ever read was C.S. Lewis' Mere Christianity. And as I was wrestling with questions of, why do I believe this? Why should I believe these things? Mere Christianity really helped me find solid ground about why I should believe these truths of the faith, right? In ministry, the biggest impact that we have with those around us flows out of our own spiritual life. And if I have good reasons and a good foundation, it's much easier to share those truths with other people. So I'd recommend Mere Christianity to anybody. The other one I would recommend is Through the Gates of Splendor, written by Elizabeth Elliot. And Jim Elliot was killed with Nate Saint in Ecuador in 1956. And Jim's perspective on the gospel is brilliant. He just has a great way of communicating the heart of Jesus to people. And so I'd highly recommend reading that book. From an aviation perspective, I have there's an author named Tony Kern, and he writes great books. One of them is called Flight Discipline. The other one is called Redefining Airmanship. And those are wonderful reads for any pilot, professional or weekend barnstormer, whatever you want to be. Those books are really, really influential in my flying life. So any of those I think would be great picks.
All right. Thanks for sharing. Those are all excellent recommendations. Okay, Pete. Well, before we close, how can our audience be praying for you and your family?
Obviously you can always pray for safety. As I'm flying, as we're out and about in town and just kind of doing daily life, safety is a thing that's always in our mind. More than that, though, I'd ask everybody to pray for the Lord to bring along our path the right people at the right time, so that we can share just the amazingness of Jesus with them. There are lots of hurting people all over this little town where we live, and to be able to have natural encounters with them where we get to share Jesus would just be fantastic. And so that's what I would pray for, is that you would help us to be an encouragement to those around us. Pray for us to lead our young boys well so that they can learn about Jesus and about his heart for them. And pray that we can be an encouragement to our teammates as well, as all of us are struggling with different stresses in our lives. We have to lean on each other as family. And so, just pray that you could help us bring unity and strength to our team.
Okay, well, we will definitely be praying for those things, and I know you will have lots of our listeners praying for you in these areas as well. Pete, how can people connect with you on social media or elsewhere to learn more about you and the work that you're doing there in Indonesia, and maybe even become a supporter of your ministry, either through prayer or even financially?
Yeah, sure. Well, obviously you can connect with us on Facebook. Pete Greenwald is my name on Facebook. I'm on Instagram as well as The Left Seat. And then if you want to go to our MAF page, it's www.maf.org/Greenwald. And there you can read a little bit more about our family and where we serve. And if you feel led, you can even begin supporting us. You can sign up to receive prayer letters or emails or those kinds of different things. So those are all great ways to connect with us, and we welcome that.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to put each of the books that you mentioned along with these different avenues to connect with you in the show notes for this episode, and they will be available on our website for anyone who wants to take a look at these books or take a look at ways they can connect with and interact and encourage you and your family. So thank you for sharing each of those things. I really appreciate it. And I do, Pete, appreciate your time tonight. This was just outstanding. I cannot thank you enough for making the time to come on the show. I have been blessed and encouraged personally by the things that you have shared, but I have also learned some new things about missionary aviation as well, and I'm grateful for that. And I assume that the same will be true for the people who listen to this show. I'm sure that they will feel the exact same way. So thank you once again for giving us some of your time. Please thank your wife for allowing you to take some time away from the family to be with us, and do know that I will be praying for God's blessings on your ministry and your family, and I hope that you and I will stay in touch, okay?
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy. I really appreciate it, and thanks again for asking me. And, anybody who ever has any questions about mission aviation, I would say please feel free to contact me, and I'm happy to talk to anybody who has even the smallest question. So thanks again. I really appreciate it.
All right, Pete. Thank you so much.
Well, that's it for this episode. We thank you once again for listening. You can learn more about the podcast and subscribe to it by visiting plainfaith.com. That's PLANE faith.com. You will also find links there to connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you are interested in becoming a patron of the show, you can do that as well by visiting patreon.com/plainfaith. And of course, Jimmy would love to hear from you personally. So feel free to email him at jimmy@plainfaith.com or by using the contact form on our website. Until next time, remember that God made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God.
The intro and outro music for the Plain Faith podcast is a song called Chipper by Kevin MacLeod. You can find his work at incompetech.com.